talk to Kathy, please?
Yeah, what do you want me
Tell
to
her whatever story. Just any words will do fine.
Any
What?
words will be fine.
Why are you just?
So do you still want me to talk to Kathy?
Yes, please. I need your volume.
And she,
Well, I'm going to turn this on, and then
There.
there we
Okay.
go.
Okay. All right.
the
So,
thing is turned on.
It's turned on. Yes.
Oh,
So
yeah, we're good. Okay. Well, I guess we'll just come and have a seat, Alice. You
do I
just-
look like I'm ready for my close-up?
absolutely, absolutely, you look just fine.
Maybe I should rush down to the barber and shave
No,
my
You're
beard off.
good. You're good.
So I guess maybe just start by stating your name and your birth date and
Where you live.
yeah, where you currently live. and-
Introduce yourselves,
yeah,
please.
that's right.
You want my birthday?
We'd like your name and your birth date,
Oh, yeah.
please.
Homer Burke, born in Watrous, August the 4th, 1928. And
And are you happy with doing the recording for the Watrous and Manitou Beach Heritage Centre?
oh, just tickled to death.
That is great to hear.
Yeah, when Kathy was here and talked to us that one day a couple of weeks ago, I was quite reluctant. You know, I didn't know if I wanted to do that. I even told you the same thing the very day of the 1st of July
I didn't think
when
you
you
meant
had
to.
all that stuff at the Heritage display at the Civic Center. And I said, oh, I don't know if I want to do something like that.
But this is all being recorded now.
That's
Yeah.
fine.
That's fine. Yes.
And then I think I even told Kathy that. But when she was here 2 weeks ago, I said I still wasn't fussy about it. I said, no, I think maybe we'll just forget about it. You can talk to somebody else. I'm pretty shy, you know, never have much to say. And so we talked on for 5 or 10 minutes, and you know, I said, yeah, but it would be a good idea, you know, to do something like that.
Mhm.
And I said, I'll go for it. I'll think it over a little bit, but I think I could manage to do that because it's something that should be done, you know. It would be good if the person that does it, you know, if a decent job is done of it, it would be something to use later on in a pinch for some kind of entertainment. So Alice said to me, well, yeah, you gonna do this with the girls? So I said, no. Kathy said, I think he just talked himself into it. So that's how it happened.
Excellent.
That's how it happened. Kathy figured he just talked himself into it. So here we are.
So maybe tell us about what you remember about your grandparents, about how they came to be in this area.
How they came to be here?
Mhm. What were their names and?
Oh yeah. Well, I suppose on the Burke side, hey, that was Anton Burke, and he was born, I think, in Lillehammer, Norway, and came across to the United States when he was just 14 years old, and then he was a blacksmith. So most of their several years in North Dakota, they lived in the town of Park River, and that's where he was a blacksmith. And while they were there, he married Anne Almond, and she was from, I think she was from Mandal, Norway.
Hmm.
And my grandfather and grandmother they had 9 children. 3 died in infancy, but 6 of them all left from Park River and came straight to Saskatchewan and straight to Watrous. And they didn't all come together. They came 1 or 2 at a time. But when my father came, he came with my grandfather and another uncle of mine, Uncle Severin. They were the 2 older boys. They left Park River, I think it was 1907, and he came by way of Swift Current, and he spent 2 months in Swift Current, because right off the bat he got a job with the International Harvester Machine Company, which was the biggest machine company of its kind in Canada at the time. So he landed a job there right off the bat, and then decided, well, Mandel is where he wanted to go. Watrous wasn't invented yet, but he was heading for Mandel, which was, it's marked just east of town here, about a mile of where the town really was. Actually, I think it's supposed to be about a mile and a half farther on, but that's where they've got the sign anyway. But anyway, that was Little Mandel. And it only existed for about 3 years, because when the Grand Trunk put the railroad through, that was the company before the CNR, they decided that the station would be Watrous, and where the station is today. So everybody at Mandel, which was only about 6 families, moved from Mandel to Watrous. And that's where my grandfather started the first blacksmith shop in Watrous in 1908. And my father was only at Mandel then for that winter, and he moved when the rest of the people moved into Watrous. So there's a picture, the Historic Society has that one picture, the Heritage Group, and I think it's in the history book possibly, of after Burndall's moved their store from Mandel, where it had been existing for about 3 years. When they moved it into Watrous, the opening day of that store, my dad is standing with a couple of the Burndall family and on the step of that store when it opened here in Watrous, pretty well across the road from where our Manitou Hotel is today there. And anyway, that's my grandfather, though, he only lived about 8 years in Watrous, because he passed away suddenly in 1916. But my grandmother from Park River had come, of course, she came in 1909, as a matter of fact, and she lived quite a few years after that. She lived till 1937. 1937, yeah, I remember that day in the winter, and my memory isn't that good, but I always say to myself, 1937, oh yeah, that temperature was 40 below. I remember that day, because that was my grandmother's funeral, and it was almost the coldest day that I could, in my memory. But anyway, that's when she passed away, in 37. But my grandfather himself, he passed away in 16. And the rest of the family, though, they still lived in the big, what they used to call the big Burke house. That's the one where one of the Stocky boys lives now. I think since then he's built a yet bigger house on the west side of town. And anyway, that is the other members of that same family. My, the one brother lived in that house with the school principal after, all my grandparents, it was in the name of my aunt, Esther. And the school principal lived in there, McCallum, and my uncle still lived in that house right up until about 1940, when he passed away. And my Aunt Esther, whose house, her name was on the house, she left Watrous and moved to Vancouver in 1942. And she was a dental technician, had been at Watrous, and that's exactly what she carried on with. When she moved to Vancouver, then my Aunt Elma, she lived in a house just over in the next block. She and her husband, Martin Skivick, they moved to Vancouver in 44. And the other brother to my dad was Howard. He came at the same time as my Aunt Esther came. They came up to from Park River to Winnipeg, and then came by the train into Watrous in late 1908, and it might have been early 1909, because just when the train started, it was either running into here. It was either late 1908 or early 1909. And the younger brother, that brother, he lived in Watrous. He's the one that worked at the liquor store, and he died in, I think it was 1944. And the other brother was Howard. He moved from Watrous out to Chilliwack in God, that was way back yet in about 1942, about the same time that my Aunt Esther moved out. So that pretty well covers that family.
So the house, the Burke house, is that on 6th Avenue?
On 6th Avenue?
Yeah? Is
Yeah,
that,
well, it's still there.
it's, okay.
And after Stocky's new house was finished over on the west side of town, and they moved out of that house. I don't know who lives in the house now.
And what did your grandfather do when he came to Watrous?
In town here,
Mm-hmm.
my grandfather was the first blacksmith.
What sort of things would he have made? Presumably horseshoes, because of all the horses used on the farms, but would he have made other things too? From metal?
And what were you pointing at when you were going like this?
Oh, this is me just talking with my hand, sorry.
Oh, yeah, well.
Because, I can, what about, would he have made any farm implements or farm tools or garden tools as well as the horseshoeing for the horses? I'm guessing he would have made horseshoes from the horses, because horses seem to be so commonly used back then.
Yeah, they made horseshoes, and then it just depended, like, all of the horses, in order to do their work in the field, had to have horseshoes. So that, I would say that making and repairing and putting new shoes, new metal horseshoes on to the horses, they would that would be their main job, but they would also make some tools too, what you would actually call homemade tools. And then then as more of these machine companies got going, they would have whatever kind of machine you bought, they would be for doing particular kinds of work, which would replace most of the home, what we were saying a minute ago, homemade tools that the carpenters, not the carpenters, but the blacksmiths used to make. And so there's that would actually, in itself, that would round up why we don't have any blacksmiths today. The more the machine companies got going, like Cockshut and Case and Massey Harris and John Deere, all of these companies, and they were all making different kinds of tools and lots of the same kinds of tools and big machinery, but plus small machinery. They cover all of the machinery that farmers need today. So that's why you don't actually see you don't see a blacksmith shop in any town. I don't think you could find one in Saskatchewan. There likely hasn't been a blacksmith shop operating for 20 or 30 years.
Or maybe more.
The only place that I ever heard of them working is when they put on Pioneer Days at the Pioneer exhibition grounds out there, usually for a couple of days each summer.
So when your grandfather passed away, do you know if anybody took over his blacksmith business?
Oh yes, well, there definitely would have been several do that work after he did. Back in about the same time that he started, there was a fellow by the name of Edwards. He was also a local blacksmith. And there you go again. You see, well, today there's about 4 machine dealers in town. All of those had to be some of those tools and machines that they make are things that the blacksmiths used to try to make their own homemade tools, you could say. Now that they have all of these big machine companies, then it wouldn't matter if there was 2 or 14 blacksmiths in Watrous. You don't see any nowadays because they've all been replaced by the big machine companies. And like I would say, like Louis Reed was one I can remember as a kid going and watching him work in his blacksmith shop. But he also passed away 30 years ago at the age of about 70. So it's likely 40 years ago that I used to watch him a little bit working in his blacksmith shop. But after my grandfather passed away, Jack Finley took over blacksmith shop in Watrous. He likely took over my granddad's shopping or blacksmith shop because it was part of his property down there, right next door to Finley's. So Finley bought my grandfather's shop, and I don't remember if Jack Finley did blacksmithing himself or whether he hired somebody to do it. I know that fellow that I mentioned, that Scotchman, just a minute ago, he used to work for Finley. And I think Finley was a blacksmith too when he first started, but then he got the John Deere leadership, and that grew and grew and grew. Just one of the larger John Deere businesses in Saskatchewan. Mm-hmm. Now owned by this Service or whatever they call that company. So that's what happened to the blacksmith people.
And how about your dad? What sort of work did your dad do? And your mum? Did your mum work?
Or, well, first, how did they meet?
Okay.
Like tell us about your mom and dad. Where did they meet? Where was she from?
And her name.
My mum she came to this town also in 1908, and she came from Wolseley, Saskatchewan. And I was surprised in that those sheets that she wrote out, which are on the table over there, it said that that she was that town celebrated its 100th birthday in about 2001 or something like that. And I thought to myself, you often hear the saying, time flies, you know, because I actually think that the date when they celebrated their 100th birthday for that town of Wolseley was more like, I won't go and get the paper, but I think it was 1998, for instance, which makes it about 19 years. Well, man, up until I read that, I thought it was only about 8 years ago that we were down there. We went down there for 2 days just to see the town celebrate their 100th birthday, because that's the town my mother was from, you see. And that's you go to these reunions, and the funniest things can happen. We went down there and we were at the breakfast, and we were. Alice was across from me, or beside me, and there was this girl sitting straight across from me, and she kept looking at me, taking side looks at me, and once in a while I was taking a look at her, and finally I had to say to her, "And what are you looking at me for?" "Oh, she said, "Oh, you're Homer Burke." I said, "Yeah, how do you know?" She says, "Because you're the only person to come so straightforward and ask a question like that. What are you looking at me for?" And she says, "You're Homer." I said, "Yeah." She says, "I'm Rita Finley. She grew up right here in this town, but her parents had lived in Wolseley, and she had been born in Wolseley herself. And they lived up on the corner of, in that house just east of that building that used to be the Catholic Church. But anyway, she was born there. She said, "What are you doing down here?" Well, anyway, I said, "We just come down to see the town because my mother was born here." And so that was a kind of a laugh that we had there. And then that same day, Jim, what did we call that fellow? He used to call his business Mr. Fix-It.
Oh, Coulter? Jim?
Not Gibney.
Jim. Yeah, he come around, he had it right printed on his truck. Jim Coulter.
Coulter? Mm-hmm.
He and his first wife were down there at that celebration too. And they were looking at me, and finally I spotted them, and so we walked over to them, and they said, "What are you doing down here?" So I said, "Well, we just came along because my mother was born in this town." And way back, and I said, "What are you here for?" So Jim Coulter's wife had been born right there in that town. That was her hometown, and that's why they were there. So that was an interesting celebration. But like I was saying a while ago, I thought, I was 8 or 9 years ago, and according to that notes that Alice made, it was 1989, I think, 88.
So did your mum and dad marry in Wolseley, or did they marry here?
She lived there just till she was 8 years old, and then she came directly from there to Watrous. Her dad, that's my grandfather, he was a railroad fellow, run a gang on the railroad, and the railroad was just being built. And when the railroad went through Wolseley, he was a railroad man then, and he had a gang, in charge of a gang, and he worked on that CPR line all the way to Calgary. And then he came, he was getting too far away from home, and he knew about this other railroad being built up north through Watrous. And so after he got out there to Calgary, he would come back all the way to Wolseley, and decided, well, he would come up and work on this line here. It was the Grand Trunk is what they called it at that time. So he moved up here just by himself and came to Nokomis in 1907, and that's as far as the railroad had come. And then he worked from there to Watrous. Well, now Watrous was going to be a city. Do you remember that plaque I brought to that at 1st of July? And it says, the new town, that's a 1910 newspaper. He says, this is going to, a booming town is going to be the first, or something about going to be a booming city. I think it says by 1920. And this was my newspaper, Water Signal, 1910, going to be a booming city. And so anyway, I guess that's why my grandfather wanted to come here. He wanted to live in this new big booming city. So the railroad had reached Watrous, and the track laying out. So as far as Watrous, by 1908. So he said, okay, that's the town we'll settle in. So then he brought his family up from Wolseley to Watrous. So that's how she got to Watrous in 1908. And that's the same time that my father got here, so they were kind of in the same group, you see, and so they got married a few years later. And she had, on her side of the family, there were her older sister, Ethel. She married a railroad engineer and didn't live in Watersville, but they moved to Bigger because that was going to be, this was a little bit later, and the railroad was going to have their train operating, the train crews would change jobs at Bigger. They had run all the way from Melville to Bigger, and then when they get to Bigger, they get off the trains, and a different crew takes the train back to Melville. So he lived in Bigger for many, many years, driving the engines back and forth from Bigger to Melville and then back to Bigger and so on. And so that is what the one sister married. That was the engineer, and another sister of Mom's was she was the same age as my dad, so she was 9 years. Older, she was, let's see, I think she'd be about, so she'd be the same age as my dad. So she was 9 years older than my mom. And she would be the second girl in that family. So anyway, she married the local dentist. That was Aunt Clara. She married the local dentist.
And what was his
And
name?
then there were two men. There was Buster Jamison. He stayed in Watrous, and he was a talented musician. He could play 52 instruments, different instruments. Anything you handed him, he could play it. He just knew how. Sort of the same as my brother, Bill, who's passed away years ago, but he could play just about any kind of instrument. So into that Jamison family, there was a lot of music, and so Buster, he could play, like I say, so many instruments, and being that was one of his talents, he had his own orchestra for years and years, and he had the local people at different points play in the orchestra, and they'd be out without fail, they'd be playing Saturday night at a dance someplace, either at some neighboring town or else at some schoolhouse out in the country. And that was his main living, next to that and painting. Through the week he was a painter. He did everything. He didn't paint, word signs or restaurant signs and things like that, but he was a house painter, in other words, inside or out. And he was the youngest in that family, but also there was a boy just up from about my mother's age. He was, Wiley was his really name, but they always called him Bill. And because I don't think anybody would want to be called Wiley. I don't think I would want. I guess it's a good name, but anyway, he didn't want to be called Wiley, so he wanted to be called Bill. But he was strictly worked for the railroad right from when he was old enough to work. So that pretty well covers it. My mom had those 3 sisters and 2 brothers.
So the uncle who played in the band, what kind of music was he playing? What kind of dances would have been happening?
Oh gosh, they would do a lot of waltzes and a lot of old time waltzes, and just whatever whatever was popular to dance to. And I'm not sure what. That was a lot of years ago. Like even he was doing a lot of playing even after the war, right through the 40s, right into the 50s. But he went overseas for 4 years also. During the war, he was in the army. And in our own family, there is just, my mother's family is, there's just 2 people. We have our son who is down in Toronto, whose wedding we're going to go to in 3 weeks' time.
And what's his name? And his...
That's Donald. And his wife is from Tehran. Well, Tehran is a city, isn't it? And she's not from the city. She's from Iran, though. She's from Iran. She's been in Canada for 9 years. She's a movie producer, and is her trade. But they're married, going to get married on 26th of August. It's a Saturday, so it'll be 3 weeks from this Saturday. And so we have that one son and we have one daughter in the city of Saskatoon.
And what's her name and what does she do?
That's Shelley, and she's married to a fellow who works for Sask Energy, and so they've been married 25 years, and her job is she's the executive director for the mayor of Saskatoon. So she tells him where to go. I don't think she tells him where to go too often, but tells him nicely where he's supposed to be.
Yeah. And do they have
Keeps
any?
him moving.
And do they have any children?
She's children?
Yeah. Do you have grandchildren?
Yeah, 4. In total. This couple in Regina, in Toronto, they have a little one, just 9 months old. So he can't even walk yet. And the one that works in Saskatoon, our daughter that works with the mayor, she's got 4 boys. So I think we'll see them on the 11th of the month. I think Alice has a dentist appointment, I believe. So the one boy, like, he's 20 now, just turning 20 this month. And the middle boy, he's 17, and the youngest just goes to grade 9 this fall, so he's just 14. So they've got the 4 boys. No, we have three boys. So they keep pretty busy in Saskatoon.
So tell us a little bit more about your dad, about what he did in the community, and
My dad?
your brothers, you and.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And what was your dad's name?
Alvin Burke. I could go and get that sheet of Alice's and maybe read it right off of the sheet. Otherwise, there's one of our birds up there.
Yep.
Otherwise, I might miss something that I would expect to know when you people are here.
That's okay.
But anyway, my brother, Bill, the oldest one, he was, like I mentioned to you, he was an accomplished musician. He went right through high school here in Watrous, and then he went straight into the Air Force for 5 years. And just in the last, just when in 1945, just when they were getting him ready to go overseas, they figured, well, geez, there's no use of him going overseas. They could see the end of the war was just about coming up, so he didn't have to go overseas. And he was the oldest one, but